Hi, my name is Janine Ouderkirk, and I'm the Executive Director at Shelter House. Shelter House works hard every day with people impacted by domestic violence and sexual assault. We've done a newsletter for a long time called Shelter House Shares. This year, we've decided to expand on that and do a series of shows about the issues of domestic violence and sexual assault through Shelter House Shares through MCTV. Oftentimes, people think that sexual assault happens somewhere else. It can't possibly happen here in Midland County, but I'm here to tell you that it does. In 2012, our prosecutor's office tells us that 31 cases were prosecuted. Our city police report going out on 33 sexual assault calls, and our sheriff's department between September 2011 and September 2012 went out on 56 calls. That is 89 calls the police responded to in Midland County. But we know that not everyone reports. Not everyone calls the police. Not everyone asks for help. So we want to increase that knowledge and awareness for our community so that we can have a better response through Shelter House, through our neighbors and friends and family. So this is Audra Johnson. I'd like her to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about why do you want to work in sexual assault? That has to be hard work.
It is. It's very hard work. But like you said, hi, my name is Audra Johnson, and I'm the Sexual Assault Program Coordinator at Shelter House. The reason I really wanted to work in the field of sexual violence is because it happens so often. And you're incredibly right in that most people don't realize exactly how often this happens. The latest statistics from the CDC show that 1 in 5 women will be raped or experience an attempted rape throughout their lifetime. That's 1 in 5, and that is an absolutely huge number.
Huge.
Yes, and then according to 1in6.org, 1 in 6 men will experience an abusive sexual experience before the age of 18. Again,
that's kids.
Yes, that's kids. And again, that's a huge number. So what we can know by that is here in Midland County, we know that over 8,000 women will experience an attempted or completed rape throughout their lifetime.
Wow.
Over 8,000. And then for men, that equals a little over 6,000. So we know it's a bigger problem than what is reported.
Together, that's 14,000 people.
Yeah.
Wow.
Just here in Midland County.
In Midland County. So, we're talking about sexual assault. Tell me, what is sexual assault? What's the definition? How do you define
Sexual assault is any sort of unwanted sexual activity that is done without consent. It ranges from unwanted touching all the way to sexual intercourse.
Okay, consent. What do you mean by consent? What does consent mean when it refers to sexual assault?
Consent is saying yes to something. Often when you ask the general public what sexual assault is, they'll say, oh, it's when someone doesn't say no, or when there's no indication. And when in actuality, consent is saying yes to something. So in order for it not to be rape, that consent has to be given.
I understand that there's 3 questions that we need to ask ourselves or others or whatever to determine, is it sexual assault? What are those 3 questions?
On our website, we list these 3 basic questions to ask to determine if consent was actually given. And the first one is, are both parties old enough to consent? And the age of consent here in Michigan is 16 years old.
Okay, 16, not 15 and a half.
Nope, 16.
16. Okay, what if you're under the age of 16?
If you're under the age of 16, legally you cannot consent.
Not at all?
Nope.
Never? Okay. So what's the second question that you should ask to determine if there can be consent?
The second question is, do both parties have the capacity to consent? Meaning if someone is passed out, they do not have the capacity to consent. So
alcohol. Okay. What other things might mean capacity might define? Developmental disabilities, maybe?
Absolutely. If there's a severe developmental disability, that capacity is not there.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Is there any other questions? We've had capacity and age. What's the third question?
The third question is, did both parties agree? Again, going back to that consent. Did they fully and freely agree to take part in this?
So
meaning,
yes.
Yes. There's no coercion, and coercion is a fancy word for talking someone into doing something that they don't necessarily want to do.
So that might be, oh, if you love me, it really, that's coercion, and that doesn't mean consent.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Now that we have the understanding of the definition of sexual assault and what consent is, and we know how to decide if it's occurred, so we decide a sexual assault has occurred, how does a survivor typically respond?
During the assault, there's a variety of different reactions. We all know about the fight or flight response. We teach that in high school. If there is some threat, the common reaction is either to fight your way out of it or to flee. But there's actually a third reaction that we're finding a lot more about, and that's the freeze reaction. In a study done in 2005, it found that 88% of sexual assault survivors experienced that freeze response during the attack. So they were just frozen and couldn't move even if they wanted to.
So if it's in the middle of a trial and they're giving their testimony and it happens to be that the perpetrator paused or stopped for a minute and the woman didn't get up and run away, is that what you mean? Maybe the freeze response? Could that be?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, it's just that frozen in time. I can't think of anything to do, just frozen.
So you're numb, you can't move. Okay, okay. So a lot of different varying responses. But what about after the assault occurs?
After the assault occurred, of course, again sexual assault is very interesting because there's a huge variety of ways that people respond. Some experience that numbness that you talked about, that just emotional numbness, I don't know how to feel, just numb. Others experience intense sadness or anger, rage. It just varies so much.
I was just at that conference in Lansing a couple weeks ago, and they were talking about how emotions and the amygdala, part of the inner brain that holds all the feelings, the anger, the fear, all of those intense feelings, and the part of the brain that stores the memory is right next to that amygdala. And they were talking about how that freeze response interrupts memory, interrupts so many things that to say there's a typical response becomes really, really tough. So how, knowing all of that, and everyone responds differently because we're each different people, how can Shelter House help? What in the world how can we even begin?
Well, we begin by offering a lot of different services. I mean, the 24-hour crisis line is a huge one. I mean, if you've just experienced a sexual assault and just need someone to talk to, we have someone there 24 hours a day. So it doesn't matter if it's the middle of the night, there's always someone there to answer the phone.
Okay.
That's the first step.
So crisis calls, we're there.
Absolutely.
Okay. What about counseling?
Absolutely, we offer counseling. That's part of what I do there is I do have a master's degree in counseling, so that's a good portion of what I do. And we have counselors available who are specially trained in the issues related to sexual assault. So they have that greater understanding of, again, the common reactions, what happens, and how to process through it.
Okay. Do you counseling for children?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Counseling for children all the way up through adults.
Okay. All right. So we just talked about children. So if a child tells you that they've been sexually assaulted, what should you do?
The first step is to take a deep breath and stay calm. It doesn't help anything when someone freaks out. It's a very touchy subject, and of course there's going to be that emotional, oh my goodness, did this happen? But the first step is always to just take a deep breath and calm down. And then, of course, get the child some help, either through the police or through our Child Advocacy Center, Safe and Sound, or through a SANE exam, which is one of the other services that we offer. And a SANE exam stands for Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner. And these are nurses who have been specially trained in sexual assault. Okay.
So what do you recommend for parents after the child, or maybe other caregivers, maybe it's not the parent, after they've had the SANE exam? Is there anything that, I mean, the SANE exam and that's it, or is there something that can happen after that?
Well, we always do a follow-up phone call after this exam because, of course, it's a very traumatic experience for the entire family. We try to make it as easy as possible, but there's always that sense of fear and upheaval of the family. The most important thing for the caregivers is to make sure that they take care of themselves, because we fully recognize that they're going through a tough time as well. They've got to try to take care of themselves as well as support their child the best way possible, and that can be incredibly difficult. So we do offer counseling and advocacy services for the parents as well.
So what kind of things to take care of themselves? They can get the counseling, they can advocacy, whatever that might be, and then what kinds of other things should they do to take care of themselves?
That basic self-care. Make sure you eat balanced meals, make sure you get enough sleep, make sure you have supportive people around you. That basic self-care.
Okay, okay. And what kind of advocacy would we do for the parents?
Advocacy is a very funny term because it means quite a bit. Advocacy can be anything from, okay, we know that sexual assault happens usually by someone that you know. It's not usually going to be a stranger. So what happens if that is your neighbor?
Okay.
There's a safety issue there that we might do some safety planning, or we might talk to you about what other housing options are available in the short term, or even help you in the long term. It all just depends on what the needs are of the family.
What about if it goes to court and legal and the poor child has to testify and on and on? Does Shelter House offer any help with that?
Absolutely. We have a legal advocate who's able to go there to help support the family throughout that entire process. Because you're right, it can be incredibly terrifying to get up there and speak in front of people, especially for a child. And so we can just be there for the child, be that friendly face in the crowd, and then help before and afterwards just to process.
Okay. So that was all about kids and families, but what if someone else, what if an adult tells you that they've been sexually assaulted? What should you do?
The first step is always the same. Just take a deep breath. Know that this person came to you because they trust you, and they trust your judgment, and they trust you. So then just listen. Listening can be by far one of the most powerful tools possible. Just listening to their story, listening to what happened, listening to their concerns without judgment. There are some things that we recommend not saying, and those are the blaming statements like, why were you there? Why were you wearing that? What did you expect? Questions like that are not helpful, and they imply blame, even if you're not meaning to. So we always recommend using statements like, I'm glad you're alive, thank you for telling me, all those supportive statements.
Yeah. Too often our community, all communities, people tend to, you know, why were you out there on that street alone at night? You know, and ask those questions, and you're right that self-blame does make a difference. Any person, any woman, any man, whoever, should have a right to walk down a street, to live in their home, to live their life, and not be assaulted. It's never, ever their fault. It's the perpetrator makes that choice. So really appreciate all you're saying. You've given us so much information, but could you explain a little bit more about what the exam, the SANE exam is? What happens?
Of course. Well, the SANE exam, like I said, it's the Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner, and basically we have specially trained nurses that contract with us to do these exams because we recognize that, especially here in Midland County, it's a pretty tiny town. Privacy is a big issue, so they're able to do these exams at the Center for Women's Health. And what happens is someone calls Shelter House and says, hey, I've been sexually assaulted and I want an exam. And so we ask a couple of questions to determine that eligibility and then go from there.
Okay, but I just want to forget that it happened, or they might say, I don't want to deal with that, or I don't want to prosecute anyways. So what are the benefits of a SANE exam if you're not going to want to prosecute or whatever? Why have a SANE exam?
It's that medical care.
Okay.
Medical care, basic, just making sure that everything is okay. And again, you have time to make some of those decisions because, of course, I mean, all of those decisions in front of you all at once can be incredibly overwhelming. So just know that you have time, and these nurses offer medical care.
Okay. You said that the exams happen at the Center for Women's Health.
Yes.
Why not just go to the emergency room?
Well, Midland is a very tiny town, and so having them at the Center for Women's Health, it offers you that extra bit of privacy. I don't know how many times I've been into the emergency room and run into someone that I know. And if it's a sexual assault, that kind of puts a barrier to getting help. And also there's the fact that the Center for Women's Health is a very calming environment. They work very hard to make sure that it's just as calm and relaxing as possible. Very quiet.
Okay. So I go to the emergency room because I don't know about I can't just go to the Center for Women's Health. So how do if I go to the emergency room, do they contact, and what happens?
If you go to the emergency room, they'll contact Shelter House, and then we'll send out an advocate and coordinate an exam with the nurse. If there's no severe injuries, you can just call Shelter House directly.
Okay, so if I got a big cut or something, the emergency room's going to take care of that piece.
Yep.
The nurse doesn't take care